Okay. Okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Pradajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Pradajana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Varudikacharya Ashtotartha Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Varudikacharya Ashtotartha Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Okay, I'm going to need a book. The book that has the marker in it. There is one. It's probably still on the shelf. And not only that, but this is the one book that has different page numbers, I think. I know where we are, 13.5, right? So what's the page number on 35? Who can tell me? No, we're doing it again. You remember I said we were going to do it again?
Page 534.
Yeah, minus 540. So put this one in place in the closet where it's hard to find it. Okay. All right. And yeah, these are important too. Mark. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, I forgot one little thing here. So again, we have our title. I think I did it right. Yeah. So the title of tonight's class is Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness, Part 3. No, that's not the title. It's Part 4. And we're further exploring the field of the activity in the soul. Okay? Sorry. All right. But aside from that, sorry, it's getting complicated because I'm going to read from the Krishna book too. Okay. All right, put this over here. Over here. All right, so we did Om Namo, right? All right. Okay. On this 29th day of June, 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness, page 534. We're going to read text 5. We didn't have a chance to explore as much as we wanted, and then we'll go on. So text 5, page 534. Rishabir Bahuda Gitam Chandobhir Vividhai Pratak Rishabir Bahuda Gitam Chandobhir Vividhai Pratak Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitai Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitai Vishabhi Bahuda Gitam Chandobhir Vividhai Pratak Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitai Rishabhi Bahuda Gitam Chandobhir Vividhai Pratak Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitai. Prakash, go ahead. Rishabhi Bahuda Gitam Chandobhir Vividhai Pratak Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitai. Glenn, sorry. Rishabhi Bahuda Gitam Chandobhir Vividhai Pratak Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitai. Go ahead, Prabhu. Rishabhi Bahuda Gitam Chandobhir Vividhai Pratak Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitai. Not on the ground. Take it off the ground. Go ahead, Dimitri. Rishabhi Bahuda Gitam Chandobhir Vividhai Pratak Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva Hetumadbhir Vinishchitai. Rishabhi, by the wise sages, Bahuda in many ways, Gitam described, Chandobhi by Vedic hymns, Vividhai various, Pratak variously, Brahma Sutra of the Vedanta, Padai by the aphorisms, Cha also, Eva certainly, Hetu Madbihi with cause and effect, Vinishchitai certainly. Translation. That knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in the Vedanta Sutra, with all reasoning as to cause and effect. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the highest authority in explaining this knowledge. Still, as a matter of course, learned scholars and standard authorities always give evidence from various authorities, from previous authorities. Krishna is explaining this most controversial point regarding this duality and non-duality of the soul and the supersoul by referring to a scripture, the Vedanta, which is accepted as authority. First he says, quote, "This is according to different sages." As far as the sages are concerned, besides himself, Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra, is a great sage, and in the Vedanta Sutra, duality is perfectly explained. And Vyasadeva's father, Parashara, is also a great sage, and he writes in his books of religiosity, Aham Tvam Cha Tatanye, which is just the beginning of a long Sanskrit passage, which is then quoted at length. We, you, I, and the various other living entities are all transcendental, although in material bodies. Now we have fallen into the ways of the three modes of material nature, according to our different karma. As such, some are on higher levels, and some are in the lower nature. The higher and lower nature exist due to ignorance and are being manifested in an infinite number of living entities. But the Supersoul, which is infallible, is uncontaminated by the three qualities of nature and is transcendental." Quote, close quote. Similarly, in the original Vedas, a distinction between the soul, the Supersoul, and the body is made, especially in the Katha Upanishad. There are many great sages who have explained this, and Parashara is considered principal among them. The word Chandoghi refers to the various Vedic literatures. The Taittiriya Upanishad, for example, is a branch of the Yajurveda, describes nature, the living entity, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay. All right. I want to read this section. Okay. As stated before, Chaitra is the field of activities, and there are two kinds of Chaitra Gya, the individual living entity and the supreme living entity. As stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad 2.5, Brahma Pucham Pratishta, there is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy known as Ananda-maya, dependence upon food for existence. Now, instead of reading this is kind of unusual, but there's a section of the 87th chapter of the 10th Canto which deals with this. And Prabhupada quotes extensively on this subject in the Krishna book, in the 87th chapter of Krishna book. So this is Ananda-maya, Pranamaya, this is what we're reading now, and I think it'll become clearer. Within the body there are 5 different departments of existence, known as Anamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, and at last Ananda-maya. In the beginning of life, every living entity is food conscious. A child or an animal is satisfied only by getting nice food. This stage of consciousness, in which the goal is to eat sumptuously, is called Anna-maya. Anna means food. After this, one lives in the consciousness of being alive. That's what prana means. Prana is life force. If one can continue his life without being attacked or destroyed, one thinks himself happy. This stage is called pranamaya, or consciousness of one's existence. After this stage, when one is situated on the mental platform, his consciousness is called manomaya. Mano means mind. The materialistic civilization is primarily situated in these 3 stages: Annamaya, Pranamaya, and Manomaya. The first concern of civilized persons is economic development. The next concern is defense against being annihilated. And the next consciousness is mental speculation, the philosophical approach to the values of life. If, by the evolutionary process of philosophical life, one happens to reach the platform of intellectual life and understands that he is not the material body, but a spirit soul, he is situated in the Vijnanamaya stage. So we have Anamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, and now Jnanamaya, and now Vijnanamaya. Then, by evolution in spiritual life, he comes to the understanding of the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Soul. When one develops his relationship with him, the Supreme Soul, and executes devotional service, that stage of life is called Krishna consciousness, the Ananda-maya stage. Ananda-maya is the blissful life of knowledge and eternity. As stated in the Vedanta Sutra, Ananda-maya Bhyasat. Now Prabhupada quotes the same verse here in this purport that we're abbreviating. The Supreme Brahman and the subordinate Brahman, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entities, are both joyful by nature. As long as the living entities are situated in the lower 4 stages of life, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, and Vijnanamaya, they are considered to be in the material condition of life. But as soon as one reaches the stage of Ananda-maya, he is a liberated soul. This Ananda-maya stage is explained in the Bhagavad Gita as the Brahma-bhuta stage. There it is said that in the Brahma-bhuta stage of life there is no anxiety and no hankering. This stage begins when one is equally disposed toward all living entities, and it then expands to the stage of Krishna consciousness, in which one always hankers to render service unto the Supreme Lord. This hankering for advancement in devotional service is not the same as hankering for sense gratification in material existence. In other words, hankering remains in spiritual life, but it becomes purified. Similarly, when our senses are purified, they are freed from all material stages, namely Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, and Vijnanamaya, and they become situated in the highest stage, Ananda-maya, or blissful life in Krishna consciousness. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that from the Krishna book. And okay, so we'll just continue because we read this purport yesterday. But just again on these different stages. Here. So it's important to understand these because we're all like living in those stages, at least in the first three. You know, when we talk about Ananda-maya, just think of like little one-celled animals or paramecium, whatever you call them. You know, they basically are just trying to eat, and divide, and this is the way procreate. Very, very, very rudimentary, but they're still spirit souls, just like we are. And you can see, dogs, cats, lower animals, rats, mice. So much of their day is absorbed in trying to find food. And the other thing that's essential is defense, fight or flight, right? Every creature has some kind of, the birds, they're always so nervous. Like sometimes you'll be walking down the alley and there's a bunch of seagulls. Used to be I don't know, maybe they decreased now, but there's seagulls, And if you walk toward the beach, there's this corner here. There's a restaurant, right? They sell pizza and everything. Sometimes they throw it out and it's there in the alleyway. And there's these pigeons. They're having a feast, But as you walk by, immediately you get to a certain point and they get scared, right? What's their response? To fly away. Right? This is their defense mechanism. So that's the pranamaya, to preserve the life. Ananda-maya and pranamaya. Now this has a correspondence in this word yoga and kshema. This phrase should maybe be familiar to some of us. Yoga and kshema come up several times in the Bhagavad Gita. In this, the word yoga can mean different things. In this case, yoga means the necessities of life. Food, shelter, like that. And the other, kshema means defense or security. Now Krishna says in the 9th chapter, if you may not recall, Ananyas chintayanto mam yejana payupasate tesham nityabhyuktanam yoga kshema bahamyaham. Now before I continue, I didn't actually read the end of the purport, so I should go. Om jnana timarandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshu unmidatam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Shri Parampara. So Krishna says there that in contrast to those who worship the gods in order to improve life on this planet or get a better life in the next planet. Did you have something? Okay. Those who simply think of me without undeviating mind. Ananya chetak means without the mind deviated. Satatam yomam smarati. They remember me. In other words, they're pure devotees. Tasyaham niguham ananya chetak satatam yomam smarati. Tasyaham sulabam parta yoga kshemam bahamyaham. I'm missing a line there, but that yoga kshemam bahamyaham is the essential line. I carry what they lack. I provide the yoga and kshema for them. In other words, somehow or other, they're able to meet the necessities of life. And we see in so many ways, Krishna protects the devotees. You read the life of Srila Prabhupada, and really he just put himself in the care of Krishna. He came alone with no money to a foreign land in his elderly days, and somehow chanting and praying and relying on Krishna, doing Krishna's work. And Krishna arranged for him to be taken care of by this person, that person. Before long, he had a whole 100, 200, 300 devotees taking care of him, and he was able to prosper so much he built temples and everything. So the idea that the lower aspects of our life are provided for by Krishna, especially when we're striving for those higher levels. So you have Ananda-maya, and then you have pranamaya, and then it's called Jnana-maya or Mano-maya. It's the same idea. I think there's two different names. Here in the Bhagavatam, it's called Jnana-maya, but it's the same as Mano-maya, the mind. And that's intellectual life, and that's really human life. But it's human life that's not very advanced. You're using your mind to serve the lower functions. In other words, Prabhupada reduces them down to eating, sleeping, mating, defending. In other words, so much mental energy is spent in building up this incredible technology, in service to sense gratification. It may be mental sense gratification, entertainment. You're sitting there, you're forgetting your whole life. But it's still on the lower level. It's Manomoya. Annamaya, Pranamoya, and Manomoya is the lower modes of nature. But when there's a beginning of the inkling of spiritual life, and you start to think of the soul, and you actually come to the realization that you're not this body, and you should try to attain eternal life. You don't know many of the details. That's the Vijnanamoya. You see? That's a higher understanding. And when you come to the point of actual devotional service, bhakti, that's Ananda-maya. Now, this word moya, one of the meanings is composed of or filled with. And that's why this little sutra or aphorism is quoted from the Vedanta Sutras, Ananda-maya bhyasat. Prabhupada would cite a few of them. And this is one of the ones he would cite a lot. What this means is that the Supreme Absolute Truth, the personality of Godhead, is filled with bliss always. I mean, why wouldn't he be? If you're God, the Supreme Controller, you'll always be filled with bliss. But what does that bliss consist of? It's not just being Atma Rama, being in touch with the Brahman. There's a bliss there. But it's the bliss of interaction, a loving exchange with his unlimited devotees. It's what you read about in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavatam, the Krishna book, interaction with devotees. Now, when he comes here, there are so many enemies. So part of that bliss is there in killing the demons, protecting his devotees from things like Indra. That doesn't happen in the spiritual world. But the idea is that we participate in that Ananda. We're also Ananda-maya because we're part and parcel of Krishna. But because we're minute, we can be covered by the external energy when we deviate from our constitutional position. And we try to enjoy separately from Krishna. And this becomes our field, Chaitra. We're studying the Chaitra, right? And this is our field of enjoyment. But it's unnatural for us. We're not the supreme controllers and enjoyers. And therefore we get punished by the material energy. For reformation. Not because Krishna takes pleasure in punishing us. He's inviting us back. He comes here, takes the trouble to come here, deal with all the demons and everything. Why? Because this is where we are, and this is where we're trying to engage in our illusory activities. And so, as he explains in the Bhagavad Gita, whenever the Dharma is lost or obscured, the Dharma is simply the way back. The Dharma is simply the way back to that life of constant Ananda, which is variegated. Every day is fresh. Every moment is new. It's not some boring situation. You're playing a harp for eternity or something. No, you may be playing a Vidanga, I can play the flute, singing, dancing, but it's ever fresh because Krishna is ever fresh. So that's where we want to go to Ananda-maya, and the whole Gita leads us to that, and that's why Prabhupada quotes in that other section in the Krishna book, which is also in the 87th chapter of the Krishna book, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma Nashochati Nakangshati Samak Sarveshu Bhuteshu Madbhaktim Labate Paran. When one comes to the Brahma Bhuta stage, and that's Vijnana, that's understanding on pure spirit, then you become naturally joyful, prasanatma. And you don't hanker for anything material, and you don't lament for losing anything. Because everything is here. You just have to uncover it. That's why our great acharyas, they live so simply. Gorkishore Das Babaji, Sakshad Vairagya Murtiye. Do you know what that means, Alex? Vairagya? And Murtiye means personification. Personification of renunciation. He would live with practically nothing. But he was very rich because his consciousness was always tasting that bliss of serving Krishna, loving Krishna. That's always with you, So that's what we should aim for. Otherwise, we can look around and we can see so much of this pranamoya, anamoya going on, and in the lower stages. It's really like animal life. And it's possible, if you're not following any rules and regulations and you're leading a sinful life, to lose this human form of life. It's said in the 2nd chapter, Nehabhikrimanashosti pratibhayo navidyate, swapamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahatobayat. That in this endeavor of Krishna consciousness, there's no loss or diminution. Now just think what that means. In this lifetime, we may do 10%. It's not easy to become a pure devotee. We know that. There's all this habit of many lifetimes. All right, so we do 10%. So it's not like some material thing where you strive to become a lawyer, and you didn't quite make it, so you get a job as a law clerk or something, and you kind of muddle through, and so all that energy you put in to try to get your law degree, it's lost. You fail. I mean, this is happening all the time. People try to do this and they fail, or they make it, and their health goes. And material life is very iffy. Anything can happen. And then at the time of death, it's all lost. I don't care who you are. I think of like these billionaires. Everyone knows the name Rockefeller, right? There's a whole dynasty starting with the first guy who made millions. It was a lot. Millions was a lot back in the early 20th century on oil. I think it was all oil. He was the oil baron, And then he spawned this one and that one. So there was one David Rockefeller who lived to be 100. And he was part of the management of the, the big billionaires get together and they try to manage the world. I forget what the name of it is. So he passed. He died a couple of years ago. So what happened to all those billions? What happened to all that influence? What happened to his name? It's all gone. That's attached to the body. Body's moldering in the grave, as we used to sing this song. But what about him? All of that, who knows what kind of activities he performed to crawl up, to claw up to be a multi-billionaire. So, Mrityu Sarva Haraschaham. Krishna says very distinctly and succinctly that as death, I take everything away. Everything material, But for the devotees, death just means you're going back to Godhead. You're liberated. You keep doing what you're doing. You're already doing within your innermost heart, you're serving Krishna in your specific rasa. Externally, you're doing whatever you can with a fading body. And then when the body goes down, back you go. Krishna comes on the back of Garuda or the Vaikuntha airplane or whatever. So this is the best investment. That's the idea, to stay on that Ananda-maya platform and serve Krishna as best you can. Try to give that wonderful life to as many as possible, knowledge, so that they can progress, and then graduate. Go back home, back to Godhead. Life has meaning. Otherwise, it's meaningless. The whole thing is meaning. Shakespeare knew it. What is it? Tale told by an idiot, wasn't it? You don't study Shakespeare anymore in 9th grade, huh? Anyway, we'll bring Shakespeare in one of these times. Yes, it's a good soliloquy. You had a question. Comment?
Well, my original question, I kind of thought about and answered in my head, but I had a different question, but it's a little off the track. But you mentioned about how there's no demons in the spiritual world.
I'm sorry, hold on.
You mentioned how there's no demons in the spiritual world.
No demons.
That those pastimes don't go on in the spiritual world. I've heard that there's rumors of demons.
Yes, there are rumors of demons.
But I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
Yeah, because, being saved from a demon by Krishna is a certain rasa, right? Or we want to enjoy that rasa, but there's no demons there. So what? Well, it's just as good if you think there's a demon, And Krishna's Prabhupada said, I think there's a cloud comes and the gopis think that it's Arishtasura again. He was a huge bull, and so they're afraid, and then Krishna saves them, and so because that's a certain rasa. That's the idea. But this demon thing, even in the in Vrindavan, when Krishna, all those demons are killed, it says it's not actually Krishna killing the demons, it's Vasudeva within Krishna who's killing the demons. Krishna just dances and plays, that's what he wants to do. So he has these expansions that do all this work, which needs to be done in the material world. All right, should we go on? Dhanavar, are you there?
Yes, Prabhu, can you hear me?
I definitely can hear you. You have a comment or a question?
I have a quick question about, would you repeat Mrityu Sarvascha Aham? Is that the one?
Yeah, that's a line in the verse in the 10th chapter. I forget
10th chapter, okay. I just make sure I heard it right.
Yeah, Mrityu Sarvaharas Chaham.
Sarvaharas Chaham.
Yeah, I as death, Mrityu, take everything away. Sarvahara. Hara means to take away. Oh. That's why we Radharani is Hari. Hare. Yeah, go ahead.
Mrityu Sarvaharas Chaham.
Mrityu Sarvaharas Chaham.
Chaham.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So I am that means I
as death
I
take everything away at the time of death.
Thank you.
All right, we have another question. Another question. Go ahead, Prabhu. Is it on? There you go.
I believe it's on now, yeah. All right. So I have an understanding that the majority of human beings are pranamaya or yanamaya. Is that correct?
It's not one or the other.
Okay.
They're anamaya, pranamaya, and manomaya, or in this it says it's gyanamaya. Those three is where most people live.
Okay, but you mentioned that the third level is basically intellect, right, or intelligence?
It involves, I mean, the meaning of Gyanamaya here, if you take the other one, Manomoya, it means it's on the mental platform. And that's really where people live. There's so much is going on with the mind, but often the mind is in the service of the lower self.
Right, but what about let's say, human beings that don't have the mental capacity to even think at that level anyway? For example, some mental disability or something like that. What would be said about them?
Well, that means that it's tragic, but they're living more animalistic lives. Many people who are really like that, they're institutionalized or something. And the idea is, well, keep them well fed and protected so they don't freak out, and keep them calm. Sometimes they give them drugs because they really can't live in the society. You have to have your wits about you just to make it, in society. But so the mind is necessary in all this thing. But if the mind is not used to contemplate, who am I? What's the goal of life? Why am I suffering? Is there life? These questions. Then it's manomoya or gyanamoya. Only when you start contemplating these eternal verities and search, just like you're sitting here, you could be a million places, and there are a million other people who aren't sitting here. So you're more on the Vijnanamoya platform now. You're thinking, all right, I'm a soul. Let me hear about all that. So that's very good. And when you actually, take up the process of devotional service, then you can start reaching up to the Ananda-maya platform.
Okay.
Sure. All right, should we go on? Text 6. So here's a couple of verses where Krishna defines the chaitra again. Mahabhutyanya hankaro buddhir avyaktamevacha indriyani dasaikancha panchachendriya gochara Icha dvesha sukham dukkam Sanghatas chetana dritihi Etat chetram samasena Savikhanamudaritam. The five great elements, false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses and the mind. The 5 sense objects, desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions, all these are considered in summary to be the field of activities and its interactions. Purport. From all the authoritative statements of the great sages, the Vedic hymns, and the aphorisms of the Vedanta Sutra, the components of this world can be understood as follows. First, there are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. These are the 5 great elements, Mahabhuta. Then there are false ego, intelligence, and the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of nature. Then there are 5 senses for acquiring knowledge, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Then 5 working senses, voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals. Then above the senses there is the mind, which is within and which can be called the sense within. Therefore, including the mind, there are 11 senses altogether. Then there are the 5 objects of the senses, smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Now the aggregate of these 24 elements is called the field of activity. If one makes an analytical study of these 24 subjects, then he can very well understand the field of activity. Then there are desire, hatred, happiness, and distress, which are interactions or representations of the 5 great elements in the gross body. The 5 symptoms represented by consciousness and convictions are the manifestation of the subtle body, mind, ego, and intelligence. These subtle elements are included within the field of activities. The 5 great elements are a gross representation of the false ego, which in turn represents the primal stage of false ego, technically called the materialistic conception, or tamasa buddhi, intelligence and ignorance. This further represents the unmanifested stage of the 3 modes of material nature. The unmanifested modes of material nature are called pradhan. One who desires to know the 24 elements in detail, along with their interactions, should study the philosophy in more detail. In the Bhagavad Gita, a summary only is given. The body is the representation of all these factors, and there are changes of the body, which are 6 in number. The body is born, it grows, it stays, it produces byproducts, then it begins to decay, and at the last stage it vanishes. Therefore, the field is a non-permanent material thing. However, the Chaitagya, the knower of the field, its proprietor, is different. So, it could be a long paper explaining this purport. But when you think about it, if you analyze these, you can study them on your own. This is really where we live. In other words, it's a complicated machine. It has both gross and subtle elements to it. We think of the body and say, yeah, body, you know. But that's just the gross machine. What really is more important is the subtle body, the internal body, mind, intelligence, and ego. Now, what's fascinating is that all of these are material. Probably list them here, which we heard before in the 7th chapter: the earth, water, fire, air, ether. Earth means solid elements. Right? We have plenty of that in our body, internally and externally. Liquids of all kinds, right? And gases, air is coming in the body. So earth, water, and fire. Fire, we talk about the fire of digestion. In other words, that's an incredibly important element also. Electricity is part of the fire. So earth, water, fire, air, and then ether, that's the space where everything is. That also counts as an element. These are called the gross elements. Now, if you notice, these are progressively more subtle. You start with earth. Everyone knows what that is. And then water, which is, flowing. It's a little different. Earth, water, and fire, that's even more subtle. Air, you can't even see it. And ether, you can't even measure it. What does that mean? And then you get to the inner senses, mind and intelligence. Now, what's the difference in the mind and intelligence? The mind basically works with the senses and decides. Just like if there's certain sounds, like sometimes these guys take pleasure in like tormenting your eardrums. They take the mufflers off the cars or whatever, right? And they like going down. Only in the summer. In the wintertime, because a lot of it is motorcycle stuff. And, terrible sound. Some of what they call music, I consider noise. That's also. So sounds can be pleasure. So the mind will say, yeah, I want to hear that. I don't know, I block that out. Let me put my earplugs in. So the mind is always judging. What's interesting? What will be pleasing? What can I to the senses? It's called sankalpa vikalpa, acceptance and rejection. Is mind's business. The intelligence, which as human beings we have, are greater than the lower animals. That's where really the crowning glory of human life. If we use that correctly, we can control and direct the lower self, the mind and the senses, so that we don't continue our entanglement in this world. What happens is that as we live through life, first of all, we come with a backstory. Our karma, things that we did in our previous life and lives, are also controlling what happens to us in this life and all kinds of things. In human life, we have a certain leeway. We can choose to do things that help get rid of our karma. Just like the chanting of the holy name eliminates eons of lifetimes of karma, even though we don't know. That's why, even hearing it once, that's why it's so nice. So we were out on the beach last Saturday, a few of us, and we were doing some Harinam. I hadn't been out in quite a while. And so many people going by, a few people stopped. But even if they didn't stop, I was very enlivened because they were hearing. We had a little amplification, And they were all hearing Hare Krishna. And I'm remembering this verse from the 6th canto. If someone hears the holy name even once, so much karma is eliminated. So I said, so they're benefiting, And a few people came over and buy a book, which is good. Then the intellect gets involved. Oh, this is, I should investigate this, So the idea is that we're a combination of gross and subtle elements, and the most important element of all is the soul, which isn't material. But we're very minute, but we're pervading this body, and we're giving energy to all the senses and the mind and everything. Without the soul's presence, the whole thing just degrades into its elements, as we know. There's no life there. So that's after all, this chapter is about, the question is the field and the knower of the field, and the interactions, and ultimately the question is always, and what does it mean, and what to do, and that'll come at the end. Actually, in the next series of verses, we're going to find out what real knowledge is, and what the goal of that knowledge is, and how to pursue it. In other words, we have to use this very body for pursuing our ultimate consciousness. That's the whole idea in Krishna consciousness, is that we're given this body, and it's kind of a part of our imprisonment. If we have no access to this higher knowledge, we're going to be controlled by our lower self, and we'll remain in the Ananda-maya, Pranamaya, platform, animalistic. It's really a tragic waste of human life. So Krishna comes to give this knowledge, and his representatives give it in a way we can understand. Like, what's the greatest part about this book that makes it accessible for us? It's in English. Right? I mean, all of this knowledge was there, but if it's in the Sanskrit and Hindi, what can we, Bengali, what can we do with it? So Prabhupada, with great effort, he translated it, and those who helped and edited, I had my little tiny role to play to make it understandable. And even then, it's heavy going sometimes, but it helps us to found our activities in faith. In other words, sitting here chanting Hare Krishna, but there's a whole backstory to it. Why? What does it mean? The history, and as soon as you begin, there's just also an experience there that you're getting. That's nourishing your faith. It's not just theoretical when you experience it. So all of that has been scientifically worked out. Just like, for instance, deity worship or kirtan. Kirtan in front of the deity. We have it every night. So all the senses practically are involved. You see the deities, you smell the incense, the heat of the fire, right? And of course the sound of the kirtan, you're glorifying. All of these senses that are being mentioned here are being used and being linked up to Krishna. That's yoga. Yoga means to link. And so what happens is that your consciousness is being transformed. It's being purified, so that it becomes more. You feel more natural in doing what otherwise is, a discipline that you take on faith. So that's all going to become clear as we continue to read. And these 20 elements of knowledge we're going to be talking about. We can start reading it, but there's a long purport. It'll take us several days to get through this purport, but it's fascinating. That accepting these elements of knowledge and acting on them will give us a nice foundation in bhakti. All right, so we're going to go on. Any question? Vijay Krishna, you with us tonight? Not?
Haribo Prabhu, Vijay Krishna is not on the call.
Okay, all right.
Like, it's just me and Tapas right now.
Okay, great.
Haribo.
All right, we're going to go on 8 through 12, and we'll just begin this purport. Amanitvam adambitvam ahimsa chantararjavam achayopasanam shaucham stayam atma viningraha indriyarteshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha doshanudarshanam asakti anabhishvanga putra dara grahadishu nityam cha samachittatvam ishtanishtopapatishu mahichananya yogena bhaktir abhavicharini vivikta desha sevitvam aratir janasangsadhi adhyatma jnana nityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam eta jnanamati proktam ajnanam yadatornyata. Okay, this is the knowledge. Remember, that's one of the elements of his question. What is knowledge? So now he's come to that point. Humility. pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the object of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides these, whatever there may be, is ignorance. All right, so we'll start this purport, and we'll continue tomorrow and probably next week also. This purport, this process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. The embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is a casing made of 24 elements. And the process of knowledge, as described here, is the means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Mahi chananda yogena bhaktir avyapicharini. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. But if one takes to devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 5.18.12, Yasyasti bhakti bhagavati kinchana sarvaya gunais tatta samasate suraha. All the good qualities of knowledge develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 8th verse, is essential. Even for one who takes to devotional service, it is most important. The transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. As for the knowledge outlined here, the items may be analyzed as follows. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others. But from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge, who knows that he is not this body, anything, honor or dishonor, pertaining to this body is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group which is not actually following religious principles, and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items. All right, before we go on, Prabhupada will systematically discuss these. But the first two actually are essential, and they involve what Prabhupada said is the essential element here of accepting a spiritual master. This humility, amanitvam. It may also recall some of us who are familiar with the Shikshastika, Trinata Pisuni Chena, Tadorapi Sahishnuna, Amanina Manadena Kirtani Sadaharu. Notice that third line, Amanina. Here the word is amanitvam. It's the same idea. One has to, just as Arjuna did in text 7 of the second chapter, right? After having this whole chapter of arguing with Krishna, explaining why he wasn't going to fight, he couldn't fight with my dear friends and relatives and cousins, you know. And then finally, after again reiterating that at the beginning of the second chapter, he says, all right, Karpanya dosho bhatasama pritchamitvam dharma samura cheta. My mind is bewildered about what real dharma is. See, in the Vedic culture, they have this very, very strong affinity for trying to do what is dharmic, what is right. Dharmic is the virtue, is the right thing to do. But Arjuna admits here that, well, my mind is bewildered about what's really right to do. I'm thinking that I'm following my emotions, which is that I have all these attachments to these people, and these, it's not just some impersonal army out there of strangers. And therefore he was saying, what do I need this kingdom for? It'll be soaked with the blood of the people I love, who I'll be responsible for killing. Better to go out, I'll just become a mendicant, which was crazy because he couldn't do it. He's a Kshatriya. So anyway, he finally comes to the point of surrender to Krishna. And that surrender means basically, I can't figure it out. I need help. Because the tendency is part of our false ego. Said, I can figure it out. I'll read this, I'll read that. I remember in the day, back in the day, I don't know if it's as common today, there was a lot of searching going on in the 60s. The drug, the LSD had kind of shaken everybody's view of what reality was, And the war in Vietnam and it was a time of great turmoil, and a lot of young people were not accepting what their parents were giving them, or the schools as goals in life, So that was good for Prabhupada finding some, a fertile ground to plant the seed of devotional service. But the point was, one has to come to the realization that I really need a source of knowledge that I can trust, and that won't try to cheat me, and will give me the truth. And so that's a tall order, because it's not easy to find. But then one has to approach with humility and submissiveness. So that amanitvam is first. Now, adambitva has two meanings. One meaning is bluffing. I'm quoting from Prabhupada in the third canto. It's translated as that damba is bluffing, hypocrisy, cheating. We've been cheating ourselves for so long. But damba is also trying to pretend oneself is religious or this or that. This whole world is full of it. I mean, no one can trust anything anymore. Lying here, lying there, lying. It's exactly opposite to what's auspicious for self-realization. One has to be honest with oneself and with others. So that's the second one. But this amanitvam, that's the first. Prabhupada is the first paragraph in this. And that's an essential characteristic or prerequisite to receive the knowledge and to have the faith in acting on it, even though there might be some difficulty, so you overcome that because you see the goal. And it's so important, the establishment of the need for the preceptor, and to understand why that preceptor is qualified. The whole line. It's not just somebody out of the blue, Who are all these great souls? What is their character? What was their life? That's why we have so many days where we celebrate, like the Krishna Pandit or others, and learn about them. These are people who are providing us faith and examples of life that we can follow. So we approach them with humility and submissiveness, and then they pour out the knowledge and the example, and we can learn and we can emulate. Not imitate, but emulate. All right, there's a lot to be said about these. We'll continue our study tomorrow and then into next week. It's a very important section of Bhagavad Gita. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.